Storyteller and archaeology describe the passions of today's guest, but interesting enough, she actually never became an archaeologist. She became a pretty amazing storyteller. Today's guest is Chrisa Zindros. Chrisa grew up in Waterbury, Connecticut, the daughter of immigrant parents who they built their version of the American dream one scoop at a time. Her dad ran an ice cream truck for decades, a family fixture that spanned generations. One of Chris's earliest childhood memories is the day a Barnes & Noble opened near her home. While her friends were running the streets, Chrisa went to the bookstore to read and to learn. And that early hunger for knowledge and curiosity never really left her. As a kid, she was fascinated by archaeology, the idea of carefully uncovering something buried, piecing together a story from fragments that connects everything together at once. But she actually never became an archaeologist. She ended up in the field of visual merchandising, where she built brand stories inside physical retail spaces and worked at it for years until the moment she asked that question, so what's next? The field of marketing and merchandising was no longer filling her cup, so she walked away from a prestigious high-paying career and pivoted and became an executive coach. While she made a significant career pivot, Chrisa always has been doing the work she loves, excavating the real story underneath the surface and helping people, brands, tell their story with grace and clarity. What struck me most about Chris's path is how natural it all came together. She didn't clock out because she hit a breaking point or was burned out. Her transitions came from a quieter, more intentional place, one story at a time. So without further ado, please enjoy Chrisa Zindros and her clocking out journey. I am just so excited about our conversation today. You and I, for our listeners, we met through a community in Manhattan, and I guess a couple months ago now. And as we've gotten to know each other, I've just become fascinated about your background. And I like to open the conversation with a word. And the one word that I felt like sums up your background is storyteller.
Fascinating. And you would say that.
Yeah, well, I was, when I looked at your profile and your journey and early in your career, the kind of positions that you've had, you're sort of like curating your own story through your career. And at some point you made this pivot and the storyteller in you became more about helping others, helping companies tell their stories. And I feel like it's just been, just based on what I've seen, this word storyteller has been kind of the backdrop of your career and your journey. And I think a lot of people will relate to this because I think people in general are trying to figure out what their story is and then owning it and just kind of like deciding when is the time to lean into my story that I want to tell the world. And I know that's what your focus is in terms of the work that you're doing. And so I'm just really excited to hear about the story. I know pieces of it, but I feel like this conversation is going to bring to life all of the details of your journey. And I think a lot of people are going to appreciate it.
Well, I'm looking forward to talking about it.
What I like to do, Chrisa, is give people a sense of where you're from. Tell us, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Connecticut. For those people who are listening, a city called Waterbury. Some people might know it, but it's equidistant between Boston and New York. Mm-hmm. So I am a Celtics fan. It's a very unpopular opinion based on the fact that I live in New York now. But I will hold true to that. But being in a place that was equidistant from two cities, there was always a pull to sort of gravitating towards like larger ideas. And I certainly always felt like I didn't really fit in my city and really did have a little bit of a hard time blending. I was so excited when Barnes and Noble opened up in our city. That happened kind of when I was in middle school. When I became cool, like the chain was blowing up. Anyways, but I wanted to go hang out at Barnes and Noble and like read books and talk about philosophy while all my friends wanted to go to parties. So I never really had like my crew growing up. But what that did is it allowed me to really cultivate my own ideas and dive into literature and philosophy and economics and things like this. And so, yeah, so those were my origins. The other part of my origin story is that my parents are immigrants to this country. And, you know, they really did decide to work for themselves and build their businesses and are very proud of what they produce. By our standards, we wouldn't consider them wealthy or maybe even successful, but they feel really proud of what they were able to do. And I always remember my dad sort of like instilling in me this idea that if you do have a lot of power or the ability to help other people out, whether it's giving them a job or giving them a hand in some way, that is like you're in the privileged position. So I've always really respected the roles I have found myself in. And I say found myself in, I know that that happens for many reasons. I didn't just end up there, but I've respected them because like they came with a lot of duty and privilege.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I just knowing the work that you're doing today, it makes so much sense how that curiosity at such an early age that almost played forward into the work that you're doing today. And was psychologist like an aspirational career that you dreamt about, or did you have other careers?
You know, I wanted to be an archaeologist. That was my dream. I had two very clear visions. I liked the creative side of things. So I always liked fashion and color. And I remember when I was little, going shopping with my mom, and we would go to, I don't know, CVS, and she would be buying things for the week. I would love to pick up lipstick or eyeshadow and try to guess what color the shade was. And I try to get close, you know, it was like cloud blue or something. You know, like I loved that process. Later on in my life, I got to be the one who can name colors for retail brands. And I have a very funny story about that, which we can talk about later. But I had this creative side to me. And I was always really interested in what made people sick. So I was going down the path of archaeology. I thought it'd be interesting to understand people's backgrounds and stories and why we do what we do through the artifact. And then in school, one realized I'm not a cataloger. I'm not a scientist. My brain doesn't work in that way necessarily. I make connections in a more kind of haphazard way versus a linear way. And also, archaeologists make no money. So I transitioned to marketing and business. But that's how we got here. Yeah.
That sounds very practical and pragmatic. And yeah, I love that at such a young age, you had so much clarity around the things that you were passionate about. It seemed like you had a lot of clarity around your values of what was important to you. And then even to the extent that you also, the financial component, in terms of what can I do to make a living? And so it's like the culmination of all those three things played into the degree that you ultimately decided to pursue. Did your parents, what were they thinking in the background as you were contemplating all these kind of choices?
My parents always wanted me to be a teacher. Like in their mind, if I worked 7 to 3 and then was able to be home for kids and then have my summers off, it would be like the best job. And from their perspective, they were not wrong, right? That would to them look like part of the American dream. It was a job that had benefits. It was, local. It gave me flexibility, all those things. Funny because I was like, I never want to be a teacher. And now I literally do teach you, just not in how they saw it. So that's kind of funny that actually happened, not in the way that they anticipated. But also, they were tickled, all the different careers that I do. when I was working in retail, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit, like my dad's like, what do they pay you to do? Couldn't understand that people would pay me to dress mannequins. Like that's what he thought was happening. I mean, it was happening, but like there was more behind that, obviously. He's like, wait, what? And now when I, switched to what I've been doing for the last, over like 15 years at this point, he's like, well, they talk to you and then they pay you. He's like, what do you tell them to do? And he just can't understand because he's, it's all like ice cream. He has a very short transaction. That's a very quick flip. I give you this, you pay me $1 kind of thing. He can't understand some of this stuff. Although he's under more understanding now, but they've been more intrigued and been like, okay, like you're going to do that, as part of my career. They've always been very supportive. My parents have actually, this is interesting, for being immigrant parents, they very much have let my sister and I sort of like do our own lives and however we want to do them. And we've always felt very supported.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. I love the influence that they had. They led by example, but I just love how early on they didn't really understand you and what you were wanting to do. They sort of had a visual of what a traditional job looked like, whether, it's a doctor, lawyer, teacher, and there's reasoning behind why they could see you doing that.
Well, my first job was actually working at an insurance company, which many people don't know. And I was doing kind of regular admin work. This is actually a really influential role for me. I was there all of like high school. And then towards the end, the people I've been working for saw potential in me and they recommended that I pursue this as a career in school. And, I was kind of set on my archaeology / anthropology plans, but I, feeded their concerns and like their call outs regarding what I was going to be doing. And it's one of the reasons why I started taking business classes, while I was pursuing the archaeology, anthropology stuff. And, through a chain of events, actually, I even went and got licensed in my series 6 and 7. I was working for an agent that was taking on the business of somebody that was retiring. And I was supporting them in helping blend their books of business. And so I started to do some marketing and just client relations kind of work. And I really did like it. I learned a lot in that job. And then that kind of parlayed to, I always had kind of an extra job on the side because I'm an immigrant kid. So we're not hanging out at home, not working. I mean, come on. So I always worked like at the mall doing something. And one of the jobs that I had was to work at the key holder at the store because I was in school. And then I could only work kind of like later night and weekends. And as part of that job, the location of this store was the hub for what was the visual merchandising team at this larger organization. And because I was working late, part of my role was to receive the shipments and kind of lay things out and correspond with the visual people at the home office when everything arrived so they can come into our store and lay out the floor set for the rest of the chain. And this was back in the day before we had all the wonderful technology and things that we do now that we can do this all kind of virtually. But I built a good relationship with the person that was running the visual department. And then over time, he started to trust me with like, why don't you lay it out and I'll come in and see what it looks like. Then that turned into lay it out and send me photos. And it turned into you can just lay it out and we'll just use your photos. And eventually they offered me a job to be a new store opening manager with them. And effectively, I was hired to, fly around the States and help them open a fleet of an additional like 60 stores. And I started to do visual merchandising. And I learned a lot about real estate, store design, construction, visual merchandising, marketing, all the stuff that happens in the centers. And that's how my career got started in fashion and retail.
First of all, I love how you weren't just settling on the insurance career path. You got your series 6 and 7. You started to get some experience. You had this mentor who was really impacting you and influencing your development. But you didn't just settle for that. And I love how you kind of tapped into doing some other things, and ultimately it was the little part-time job at the mall that exposed you to this whole other field that aligned with what one of your interests was. Did you eventually walk away from that?
I eventually left. Like, it was a job that was going to require me to have to be there more and more. And I was still in school at the time. But there was like this moment where I had to take like a fork in the road. Because concurrently this like visual role was kind of growing and I wanted to spend more time doing this kind of work. And then that was taking me away from focusing on the work that I was being asked to do at the insurance company. That was like, I was doing that job 2 days a week, in between classes, and then like at night going to the store, and then on weekends being there. And I just wanted the show to be more like naturally. I felt the pull. Now I think I probably would have picked insurance. Like the way I'm wired today, I would have picked insurance. But I feel like that's the evolution of my brain. But yeah, so like it was a natural sort of like I had to pick something. There wasn't enough capacity with school, so I picked the retail side of things. And so then there was a job offer on the table, and so I took it. That was a leap of faith, and that I lasted in that organization for 3 years. I did a lot of traveling. I managed people. It was a huge sort of one of those times in your life where you're drinking from a fire hose, but it's so fun. You have no idea that you're not sleeping or eating, and you're, what city am I in? That kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then that led me then to do what I call the circuit in retail. I've worked for almost every brand you can imagine. Many companies are owned by holding organizations. So I would typically work for a few brands under the holding organization. And that was like really where I felt like I was in my dream. I remember I was just like, this is freaking amazing. And the story that if you heard any podcast that I've done, and they've heard the stories, anyone else has heard a podcast, the story that I tell is like, there's this one moment where I'm like walking down 7th Avenue and I'm coming into my office. It's a corner office, by the way, it's overlooking the Needle in the financial district. And I have this like ridiculous outfit on, and I have like a $12 coffee, and I'm just irritated. Like I was just annoyed and frustrated, and I felt like something was wrong and off. But that's what I teach my clients now. It's like when you have had a full dream, when you have really the expression of the work that you wanted to do, your soul, your intuition, your mind, whatever you want to call it, starts to get like antsy. It's like, okay, what's next? And one of the ways that it tries to get your attention is that it tells you like this is boring, or it makes you nitpicky, or it makes you aggravated with the things around you. And after having like what I really felt was a wonderful career in the fashion space, I got to do all these 4 interesting things for brands, everything from remodels to rebrands to launching old brands to launching new brands. So I felt really proud of all those things, and then hit a natural point where I was like, okay, what's next?
Well, first of all, kudos to this career that you built. It sounds like I love the visual of the $12 coffee and you're walking to your office, because, at that moment, it's like you were at the top of your game. And you had accomplished so much, and I feel the sense of pride that you had in your work and your brand, and where you've evolved to in your career. And the fact, like, this whole storytelling is so fitting for me, because like you just told this beautiful story around how you've grown in this industry. And I love how you articulated that, because I feel like there's so many people who in their own job, in their own career, have curated a similar sort of career path. Mm-hmm. And they have those moments where they're sitting somewhere and they see something, they reflect on something, and just like you did, and then you felt like, okay, what's next? But then oftentimes people are like, well, I invested so much. I can't throw it all away. And so they keep continuing on, and they may be like, oh, I'm just going to go to work and continue on and get the next promotion and just keep working toward this thing. But they never act on that. What's next? And it's just interesting how you described you at the pinnacle of your career and you ask that question, that simple question, what's next? And then it's like, it's time to curate a new story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's funny is I said to you in the beginning, I wanted to be the person that named the colors. And I remember one of my very first jobs when I was taking on more like consumer experience. Well, I walked into the color closet of this like beautiful office building in Manhattan. And it was like every color and like beautiful threads and fabrics. And I was just like a kid in the candy store. And part of my job was to go figure out what was the theme of the collection and how we were going to name some of these colors alongside designers. It wasn't, just my job. So I was working in partnership with people. But later on, when I was starting to get frustrated and irritated, I'm like, how many times am I going to name the color pink? Carnation pink, light pink, like it's pink. I remember having this conversation, like, I can't name pink anymore. Like it's pink, And it's funny that we took that like full circle of that. But yeah, it does actually, the point you made regarding, people going like a staple on locomotion, you can, like, there's nothing actually wrong with that. I think people can have full lives and careers, even without making a career pivot. It's not always appropriate for people to make a career pivot, for various reasons. Like they have families, they have whatever responsibilities. And so they can't do that. And that's okay. But then there is, from the place that I sit today with clients, there is a way to design what's going to make you happy. And so we have plenty of options today to be able to create lives, whether through hobbies or volunteering or side hustles. The world is just smaller and you can reach people in a faster and easier way because of technology. So you don't have to make a hardcore pivot. You could stay where you are and have the supplemental thing. What I have found is that eventually, like, your soul, like, will vote. And the more that you don't listen to the vote, the more miserable you become in the place that you're in. And this is true for anything, relationship, business partnership, etc. And so at some point you have to decide, are you going to stay in complaining, or are you making the choice for not choosing and then be happy with that? And both are fine. I didn't have a reason to leave my career. It was wonderful. I loved it. I made good money. None of those things were an issue. But the universe, I keep talking about the universe today, because I don't always talk about it so much, but there was things happening in the world where, like, in my life personally, and then also in the organization that I was working with, that were natural points where there was off ramp. And I decided that I would take an off ramp because it was just made sense. And I didn't think that I would be at that moment actually leaving fashion. Background story is that I had been growing in my career. I was a part of fashion in a time when we didn't have websites, and we were building websites for the first time so people can go shopping. I remember doing the very first Facebook post, and like all of us sitting in a room when we pressed like send, like that, how old or long ago this was. Anyways, so all this is to say that, like, I was a part of this world in a time when things were changing. And because of that, a lot of the functions that we once had to sustain brick and mortar were collapsing, and we're creating other functions inside companies, like social media teams, and things like this that just didn't exist. Those weren't even words. And so my role continued to expand, both because things were collapsing underneath me and we were taking on breath, but also we were designing. And so, long story short, I needed help in that. I didn't know how to do those things. I didn't have the skills. I was managing people that, I didn't understand their day to day. And my bosses were really supportive in giving me learning and development, but they also gave me a coach, which I hated the full process. I didn't want it. I wanted to actually quit my job at some point when my role got too big. But I had people that really believed in me, and they opened me up this idea of coaching. And I was the worst client for a few people. Well, I apologize to them. But then I finally found a coach that I really loved. And I always was like, how do you know that that's going to happen? Or how did you pinpoint that person is just bullshitting me? Or how did you, like, I had all these questions and she's like, you know, like, you're really interested in this. Like, maybe you should learn what I'm doing. Like, it could help you in managing the politics that you're now dealing with. And, you know, it could just help you be stronger in your leadership because you would have like the mechanic. And so being the person that loves to read and always wants to share my knowledge, I decided I would learn to be a coach. And I really just did that for fun in my spare time and as part of training and reading. And I've done like pretty much every training under the sun as it pertains to coaching at this point. You have to take on practice clients, right? You have to do the implementation, not just the theory. And so I would take on clients for fun. And I loved working with them. And so just like, again, working in retail opened myself up to this idea of maybe I wouldn't be an archaeologist or go down the insurance path. This opened me up to like, wow, I really love working with people in this way. And so that moment that I was talking about when I was walking with my $12 coffee and miserable, I had been coaching for a while as a part-time job, you know, a few clients on the weekends at night. It's probably been about 6 years that I've been doing that role. Concurrently working a big corporate job and traveling and managing big teams and all that. And it was always kind of a place that gave me solace. So again, I found myself in this position where I was doing something creative and then also something that was about what makes people sick. Like that's kind of always been the balance of things.
Wow.
And through a chain of events, I decided that there was a moment in time where the company I was working for was getting bought and sold. I was getting married at the time, and I was like, you know, it makes sense to just like take this package that was on the table for the exec. If we so wanted it, we were being retained. We were just going to be recycled. But if we so wanted it, I took it, and I thought, I'll figure out what's next. I'll, you know, take a little bit of a break. I'll go be a CMO somewhere. But I'll just take a few months off and figure it out. And when I made the decision, literally, I made the decision, went to HR and took my package to like think about it. You know, my boss at the time was like, "You're not really going to leave, are you?" And I was like, "I don't know." And he was like, "You're not leaving." I was like, "Why would you go anywhere?" I was like, "I don't know." But as I was walking back out into 7th Avenue, it was the first time I told the story in this way, like leaving my office. The company I had been working with, coaching, the CEO calls me and he's like, "Hey, do you want to come work with us? Like, we actually have a need to continue to grow our corporate division and we need some people that can support us in helping businesses scale," because they were getting a lot of like Series B and Series C clients and that were growing their staff. And I was like, I can't do that job. I've never done that before. And he's like, "Don't we do that now?" And I'm like, "Well, no, I do marketing." He's like, "So don't you run a team?" Like he's like, "What are you talking about?" And so we got in conversation and I took a role that I thought I was going to do for like a few months and was there for 10 years.
Wow. So. Chrisa, that is such a cool story. I'm like beaming here because you had this side hustle when you were at the insurance company. And now you're in this career and you created a new side hustle, which is coaching. And there's so many like life lessons here because we talked about how people have these what's next question. And you didn't just do that one job. You leaned into something that was really interesting. That whole curiosity that you described as a young kid going into Barnes and Noble, that curiosity when you found the right coach, that spoke to you and you learned about it. You became a coach. You did it for 6 years while you were working for the big brand, doing the corporate job, but you created this side hustle. And I think that, but you found time for that. You know, like I think a lot of people are like, "Oh, I don't have time for that. I'm working too many hours." But you always seem to make time to do the thing that ultimately would be the new thing. And so it was like the what's next question wasn't like this fork in a road. I was going to just stop doing what I'm doing and I'm going to do something different. You almost curated a completely new thing over a period of time. And that ultimately became your new thing. And it just felt natural. you got this phone call, and what a beautiful transition.
Thank you. I mean, the phone call was weird. It really was like the day I went to HR and I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll take this package. We'll see. I was starting, like, I was working with headhunters and I'm like, okay, like, they're going to take some time to find me roles. But like, why don't I just leave? Because, there was a deadline and when we can all take the money. And I was like, I don't know. Like, let's see, And nobody wanted me to leave. So it was like this moment where I was like, do I go? And then all my friends thought I was crazy because they're like, wait, what are you going to do? They're like, wait. And, this wasn't like I was going to go make the same amount of money somewhere else. It was like a massive pay cut, a ridiculous amount of money, in pay cut. So, I was kind of sitting in between and kind of had the thought of like, okay, this, package will float me until I find the next thing. So it wasn't like, okay, it's comparable money, I'll do something different. Like none of that was there. It was really kind of an abyss. I had no idea what was on the other side.
Chrisa, you said something that really struck me, which is around taking a pay cut. And when I think back to when you were working in the insurance job and then you decided to go full time on the opportunity at the mall, and then now you're in this, big corporate job and you're faced with having to take another pay cut to pursue a completely new career. I feel like both of those scenarios, passion won in terms of the work that you were doing, whether it was the mall job or working in the coaching. And I think a lot of people are faced with that pay cut. How hard was it?
Was the pay cut hard? The answer is no. For me, it wasn't because I had been good with my money. So I was never an overspender. Again, I'm an immigrant's kid, right? So like we afford all of our money, spend it on things. So I was never an overspender. I had money to keep me floating. And I've always really lived in reality as it pertains to money. Good and bad thing. So for me personally, that wasn't very hard. But over time, when I'm just like looking at my paycheck coming in, my bank account changing, that is really when it hit. But that's where you have to start to get creative with how you see money and how you make money. And this is where your identity comes in. And so the interesting thing is when you start to see that lull, there is a way that you can influence what happens. And once I started to feel like, oh no, like this is going to get tight, I focused on making more. And then I did. So it wasn't a corporate salary with all the fun things that come along, the bells and whistles with it. But it never got to a point where I was second guessing the decision because of money. And part of it is because I set myself up for success, not knowing that I was doing that. But for people making pivots, like you have to set yourself up for success. And then you also have to know you're going to be different. So once upon a time, I was going to fashion shows and going to showrooms. And so I had to look and dress a certain way. Now I sit literally in this chair for 12 hours a day. So I can wear the same leggings for a week. Like we just need to spend money on different things, right. So your life does actually start to reflect, like what's happening for you. So you need, in some instances, less money or more money. It just kind of depends. So it's not the biggest factor. And I've seen this to be true with my clients repeatedly, that the money doesn't end up becoming the biggest factor if they set themselves up for success. And also if they do the identity work responsible and required for being able to assume this new state of being. Because me going from having this like big career at this big company, there was prestige with that. There was like an affiliation. It was like who I was. And again, I poured a lot of myself into work because I loved it. But for most people, that identity piece is what makes the difference. And if you don't do the identity work, then you always feel like you should have been over here. You made a mistake. Nothing is good because your sense of self has to shift. Yeah. And so I went from being a corporate person to being like working for a small consulting company to now being like an entrepreneur. Like I've had to figure out, or a business owner at this point, like I've had to figure out how to be different people. And so you have to look at the world differently. And then also not let the same things trigger you. Because if you're used to a biweekly paycheck, you will get triggered if you don't get one. But if you start to identify as somebody who doesn't get a biweekly paycheck and what that means in terms of your state of being, then you just ride through that in a much more smoother way. And that happens in layers, right? It happens at the layer of like how you view yourself, at the layer of how you relate to things, and then also at the layer for how you do things. I think that's important. And I certainly had to do that work on myself in various ways. Sometimes I did it unconsciously. I wasn't realizing I was doing it. But in recent pivot, I've done it very consciously.
Oh, that's great. I love it. I think that the identity shift it's hard work, but it's the most rewarding, because on the other side, the thing that just struck me and I wrote down is freedom and flexibility. But you're now working in a situation where you have this freedom, this flexibility to create your own. And my sense is that you can earn as much as you want, take on as much work as you want, but you have the freedom to make those choices. And I feel like, like as you're sitting today, just the energy that you're putting off is someone you're living your life's work and your purpose and meaning. And I know that must feel really good.
Thank you. I appreciate that you observed that. The coaching work that I do is very much feels like a vocation. Like that's sort of how I got started in this space. The coaching was more one-on-one coaching. Now my work is balanced between the consulting and fractional work and operations and strategy and all that, which is like a big joke because I'm a marketing person. So the fact that I do operations is like hysterical, because I can tell you that people from back in the day, I was like the worst operations person. I like broke all the rules. Finance didn't like me. I never got my budgets in on time. And now I'm the person like, hey, where's your budget? Like, can you please come to this meeting? Like that. I could get your expenses in, whatever, like expense management. I was like the one spending all the money. But, like that work is where I have the creative outlet, because that's where I'm doing a lot of org design and team structure and supporting CEOs and building their businesses and helping them think through what's their offering and their positioning. And just depending on what function I'm taking on for people. Sometimes it's interim CEO work. Sometimes it's really just supporting the in-house team. But that, I find it actually really creative, which I never thought I would say. And by the way, I never thought I would be this person doing this. It wasn't until somebody called it out in me that they were like, oh, wait, like you actually understand business. And I'm like, well, I've worked for a big company. So yes, I know all the things I have to do. But like I never would have picked this for myself is the truth, but I'm actually really good at it. And I find it as a creative outlet because I can see all the pieces coming together. And going back to this thread I mentioned earlier, it's like, I want to leave the company more beautiful than when I found it. And sometimes I can do that because the conditions are fair and the conditions make sense. So sometimes I can't do that. And that's the hard part of being a fractional person or somebody that is consulting for other companies, is that you're brought in to solve a problem, but sometimes people don't want their problem solved. And other times the problem is way more complex than your scope can possibly solve. So you have to sort of reconcile that within yourself. But I say all that to say that work is like my creative outlet. But when I'm doing coaching with people, change management, one-on-one work with executives, and I don't even like to call it coaching. That word bothers me at this point because it's kind of overused. It's really one-on-one consulting with people, and supporting them in how they're structuring their business, their personal brand, helping them through their own transitions. How are they scaling their leadership? How are they influencing the people in their life? And it's a lot of workshopping. It's not just talking at people or asking them, what are your goals? Like, that's not what I'm doing. It's really definitely like diving into the nitty gritty with them. But when I'm doing that work, I literally feel like it's my flow state. When I have a full day of coaching clients, I'm like the happiest ever. Like the day flies, I have energy at the end of it. It really is flow state. Very similar to the way I used to feel when I would get like a bunch of product come in and I had to like lay it out and make it mean something, make the product tell a story inside of an environment. I'd find myself working for hours and it felt like 2 minutes.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I feel like like this flow state that you found yourself in. It's a place where you have balance. So, Chrisa, what is next?
So I love working with founders. And some of the work that I do is I'll work with like PE firms, and they'll bring me on board to help support their founders at their series raise, or they're dealing with a company if they've invested in and they need support with the leadership team. So I do a lot of that work already. But I love to invest in companies that I believe in, and then support the founders in getting to their goals. So part of what I want to be focusing on in the next few years is doing some more angel investing and working with founders to support them in their growth. I will always continue to do the coaching / one-on-one consulting work. That change management work is so fun inside company. You can't have one without the other. And that's one of the reasons why I started my practice, is because oftentimes we'll hire a consultant and they'll come in and they'll do this one thing. We'll do change management for you, or we'll do learning and development or high potential training. And then you can hire somebody else to do implementation work. What I love about, because of the ways that I work in various size companies and the various roles that I've had, I can start with a company and do change management and then realize, okay, it's a systems problem, not a person's problem.
Yeah.
And let's go fix the system and then toggle back over here. I can kind of support them 360, and that makes a big difference. Honestly, having been somebody that's hired consultants in my past life, brought people in from the outside when I was working for big companies to support us in change and systems and consult on various things. Like, I really kind of wish I had a 360 solution, and I'm glad that I can provide it to people, in a way that like supports them in their business goals. But also doesn't create a big mess inside of an organization, because as we all know, we can bring in a consultant and they have opinions and they do this assessment and they give you the state report and you're like, okay, and then to go implement it. And then 3 years later, my friends that work at McKinsey, I know you're listening to me now. I always, have lots of debate, me and those friends. But then 3 years later, you're like, oh, this consultant came in, they blew up our thing. They like told us to cut all these heads, but now we have this problem. Like, I try to minimize all that stuff in the work that I do. And it's not like as dramatic or like sexy as like a McKinsey person walking in and giving you some framework and saying, do these things. But it is more harmonious, and it does allow companies to not feel the ups and downs of change, because we're toggling between change management, leadership development, culture work, and the implementation side of things. So that is to say that I absolutely want to spend more time with founders and helping them shape their businesses via both investing in them and supporting them in building the infrastructure and the culture of the organization.
I love it. I, as a founder myself, who's raised venture capital early on, it was the first time I've done it. And so having someone like yourself who has experienced it and has that, the fact that you're interested in investing and supporting the founders through their journey, I think is really cool.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a good time.
Yeah. So Chrisa, thank you so much. This conversation has been just terrific. I love the story that you shared early on with the Barnes and Noble and that curiosity that you had. And I loved hearing about your parents and the space that they gave you and your sister to figure out like what your career is going to be and what impact in the world you're going to have. And so I think what you shared is incredibly relatable to people who are in varying stages in their career. And so I appreciate the stories that you shared. And I'm going to provide your website, your LinkedIn profile in our show notes, so people will absolutely be able to find you. Thank you again. This has been great.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks everyone for listening. Until next time. Hi everyone, it's Raymond again here. I want to take a moment and say a special thanks to our sponsor, Career Minds. They're a global provider of workforce solutions. And if you like what you're hearing on the show, we'd love for you to take a moment and click follow on your favorite podcast app. And while you're there, please leave us a rating or review. It really helps new listeners find the show. And you can also watch the full episode on YouTube. Just search for Clocking Out with Raymond Lee and hit subscribe. And if you're listening on Spotify, don't forget to check out our episode polls and drop us a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Finally, if you or someone you know has a story that they want to share about navigating change, taking a risk, or rethinking their career, we want to hear from you. Head to the link in our show notes and fill out the form to be considered for a future episode. Until next time, remember, if you're sitting there and you're just stuck or unsure of your career or future, and you think it's time for a change, I would encourage you to ask these 3 questions. Does my career or work make me feel alive? Am I doing the things that matter to me most? And am I creating value for myself and for others? Until next time.